Maja Zelihic, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I'm thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Greetings to you and your listeners.
Really excited. Can't wait to talk about our perceptions, how they impact how we react to the world around us, most especially as leaders of organizations. But before we get to that, Maya, would love to know whereabouts you grew up and how your upbringing impacted the kind of person you've become.
Sure, I was born and raised in former Yugoslavia, born and raised in Bosnia, Sarajevo, with parents and grandparents. I didn't have any siblings. So I had a very, very wonderful childhood, lots of support during my formative years, a household that was very much focusing on the education and values of education. I had a very supportive grandfather in particular, who was very crucial member of my household as far as my upbringing and giving me certain values that I still hold dear to this day. At around 17, when I was approximately 17 and a half, I ended up, the whole country ended up in a war. And a few years later, basically, I ended up in a refugee camp in Austria and eventually immigrated to the United States. So came here as a refugee as well, in refugee status in the United States, started a new life. And I've been in the United States for 26 years now.
Yeah, so that experience must have impacted you quite a bit, Maya. So I would love to find out how did that transition from that established family with your parents and grandparents to becoming a refugee? How has that impacted you, and how has that changed your perception of the world?
Well, it was a significant trauma. There were many research studies that were exploring the concept of collective trauma, because sometimes when people experience trauma, they do it on their own. But I was experiencing it together with so many others from my country and the region. So doesn't make it necessarily any easier, but you do have a lot of support system, people that are going through the same or similar circumstances that you do. It was a shock. It was absolutely devastating. My parents and grandparents did not follow with me. So there was a fraction of that time that I was actually all alone. I was very special to my family. I was the only child, and there were certain things that were praised and valued at our household that were not necessarily needed during the refugee years. I didn't have many of the survival skills. I was poorly equipped to handle life on my own. A case in point, I didn't know how to cook at all. And here we are in this setting where we can alternate and use the all the cooking equipment, but it's hard to use it if you don't know what to do with it, right? So I had to learn real quick how to be an adult, and I had to learn real quick that I wasn't necessarily as special as I thought I was. However, the love that was given to me, that incredible love and happiness that was given to me in my formative years, carried me through and gave me strength, and also instilling in me the values of education. As soon as I was able to get myself together, for the lack of better words, I was asking the Society of Austrians. I was a refugee in Austria in a camp. They were taking care of us, and they were asking us what exactly are our goals. And I was asking them and kind of begging them, for lack of better words, to go back to school. And they said, well, you can do that if you pass the German state exam, which was kind of unheard of, that one can do it in 2 months. Written exam was better than an oral exam, but somehow I made it through, and I started going back to the university setting. And that was a lifesaver for me, because I think the strength and the love and the support carried me through for many, many years, when these individuals who were so important to me were no longer around me, supporting me actively.
That is so beautiful that the foundations they had laid in charging your batteries and giving you the right values were the ones that kept you going through, whether it was as a refugee and then eventually transitioning onto the States. Now, you also mentioned that you had to take the exam. Did you speak any German? Or in a couple of months, you had to gain mastery on the language too?
Well, the do not test me on German now. I used to be incredibly fluent because I was going to the University of Leopold Francesca in Austria. But language is a living mechanism. If your organism, if you don't use it actively, but in 2 months, I would imagine I would get back to being fluent. No, I did not speak German. So what I've done is I've started learning for the written exam, and then there was a supportive Austrian family that kind of took me in for a little bit over the weekends, and they were practicing my language. And I remember seeing my name as I passed the written exam. Wow. And then they told me I was celebrating, and then they're like, well, not too fast. You're going to have the oral exam. I started talking to a panel that was examining us, and they looked at me and they looked at my written score and they're like, you sound so strange. What's happening? And they said, when did you arrive here? And I said, like, September. And I was doing the exam in November. And they're like, is this it? Because they could sense like I'm still like really not anywhere near where I need to be. They passed me based on the time, duration from the time I entered the country and the time I took the exam. So that was actually interesting.
Yeah, it is wonderful where they gave you that opportunity, but obviously you showed a lot of potential too in a couple of months mastering the language enough to pass the written version and some of the communication with the people that were testing you. So then, Maya, part your love for education, you had experience here in the States in business. What got you to go back to school, want to get your PhD? And become a teacher of that education?
Well, my story, I didn't necessarily feel in control of my story. And I think in life, a lot of times, one of the values here in the American society, if the person being in control of their own story, I felt that I was constantly thrown into this current like a river. And I had to kind of figure this out as so make the long story short, I was doing really well at the University of Austria, but I got the deportation notice, meaning that I have to exit Austria because the war ended. So I cannot continue my studies in Austria. So I actually had no choice but to immigrate. So I'm thrown again into a situation of uncertainty, having to immigrate to yet another country, not completing my studies. So I'm leaving Austria without my studies completed. I came to the United States again as a refugee. And I remember on a bus that was taking us from one New York airport to another. Don't quiz me which one to which one, it doesn't matter. But I remember asking a bus driver, can I go back to school here? Which actually amused all the other refugees on that bus. They're like, look at this crazy person with this question. She's asking a bus driver. And the bus driver in New York looked at me and he said, honey, you can do whatever you want to do here. And I was clinging to his words. Sometimes we make an impact on a person's life. Sometimes we influence their story and we don't realize the significance, good or bad. In this particular case, there's this one bus driver in New York. He had no awareness the impact his kind words had on me. And his words were, you can do whatever you want to do. And I came to Jacksonville, Florida. Actually, we immigrated here and went through the Lutheran social services, and they were trying to place us for work because you have to work to be self-sufficient. And I asked them, it's actually so funny and so naive now. I said, can I go back to school? And they said, well, you have to work first. And I said, but the bus driver said I can go back to school. And it's like, who was the bus driver? So ultimately started working. Of course, I worked at the warehouse. I worked manual labor. I mean, good, decent job, but very tasking. And then I started going in the evening. I started going to this high school. They were offering free English lessons. And after that, I evaluated my credits from Austria, and then I went back to the community college, and that's how my educational journey started again.
Maya, I love what you just shared. We haven't gotten to talking about perception, but there are a couple of elements of what you mentioned that I think are of tremendous value to all of our lives. First of all, you talked about being thrown in the river. To a great extent, that's a part of our lives in that some aspects of it we are not in control of. We are thrown into different rivers. Now, within each river, we have the potential to choose where and how we swim. I love that part of it. And then additionally, think about the impact we can have on someone's life. That bus driver probably has not thought a second time about his interaction or her interaction with you. But that bus driver's simple comment changed your perspective on who you could become and what you could do. What a beautiful way to think about our potential to impact people with the slightest word of encouragement and possibility that we share with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about a perception. I was perceiving him as a person of authority. I'm not saying he wasn't, but he has no connection with the refugee program, but he was my person of authority in that bus. That was my perception. And based on that, I was engaging with him. And like I said, I'm sure others were like, what is going on? So
I love that story. So again, eventually you went on, you had the career. What was it that got you focused in on understanding that perceptions matter and we have different perceptions of exactly the same event, experience, or communication?
well, what had happened was I went from the warehouse into the banking industry, from the banking industry, financial industry, and stayed in the financial industry for quite some time. I discovered the love for teaching through corporate training. I was running a few different training departments as far as the different training programs for different financial companies. And then ultimately, I went full time in the world of academia. I was not aware of the concept of perception per se, nor was I necessarily interested in the concept of perception. But throughout my life, I realized here in the United States, I was I was I was reacting with more caution to ordinary life circumstances. I had more paranoia, more fear towards certain settings that my coworkers had no issues with. And I was reading too much into managerial announcements, almost looking for the negative versus positive, because I was by the nature a pessimist. Now it's so easy to put a label on oneself. You heard my story. You go through a normal, happy, and you and I touched upon our stories a little bit. People sometimes think that refugees or people coming from the war zone or people currently in the war zone, oh, they're so used to it. And here I am to tell everyone of your listeners, no, seemingly it happens overnight. Your life is changed upside down, and your happy existence is no longer there and will never be there. It will never be the same. So that is why I was a pessimist, because I was used to happiness being taken away from me. I was used to being controlled by people I don't want to be controlled by. So when I react to something seemingly insignificant in a corporate setting, that was the result of my life experiences and what had happened to me. I was not aware of the perception. It was years down the line in the academic setting when I started collaborating with my colleague, Dr. Diane Hamilton, and we were marginally aware that she perceives things more in the optimistic lens, more positive, versus me always being a little bit more negative. And Diane was always mentioning the concept of zebra with me, Maja zebra, because and she also was telling me one thing. For example, she was telling me in any human interaction I have, I would go on a roller coaster. Someone is either absolutely amazing or, oh my God, they're the worst person ever. And Diane's like, you know what? The vast majority of the people are somewhere in the middle, Maya. They're not good or bad. I mean, they're pretty average. So we had those discussions and we were joking around. And in my TEDx, I was talking a little bit how this came about. So I don't want to, your listeners can listen to that. I don't want to repeat that story. But ultimately, there was a disconnect between what I was hearing and what she was hearing. And we literally one day we took a notepad and we were on the phone and we were like writing things down. What was different between the two of us? Same gender, same education, actually almost identical, terminally degreed, same gender. I mean, similar in age, nothing significant to talk about. And I'm not going to say equally intelligent, because who's equally intelligent, but very comparable intelligence. So something different is off. It's the formative years and it's the life experiences that impacted us seeing reality differently.
Yeah, so that impacts our perception of the world around us, Maya. But I wonder, everything can impact our perceptions. So, what are the critical factors when we want to reflect on our perceptions and other people's perceptions? What are the critical factors to think about? Because you talk about siblings would have very different perceptions, even though they can grow up in an almost identical environment. So, we have 7, 8 billion people in the world, 8 billion perceptions. So, what is it? how is it important for us to understand the main factors that influence our perception?
We were focusing on the corporate setting because we were creating the perception power index that was geared towards companies that are trying to evaluate the perception mechanisms impacting their employees. Why? Because they want to align the message to the business reality. They want their employees to hear the business reality. That is tied to motivation, that is tied to the performance effectiveness, and ultimately productivity. That's the ultimate goal. So in order for one to be a global leader, because we were gearing this towards global leadership, one has to polish his or her perception. It's a live organism that can be worked on and can be, it's a toolkit that can also be absolutely changed. So we can only focus on some variables. And you said 7 billion. I mean, so variables we focused on: culture, formative years, life experiences, one's society and its impact, gender, quite a bit. We focused on gender. We were not spending too much time on age. There's so many research studies talking about different generations. We just didn't want to provide people with same old, same old. So we felt kind of that particular area as well. Research, they touched upon it, not too much. Curiosity, because Diane is an expert in curiosity. Your curiosity impacts your perception quite a bit. So culture quotient, curiosity quotient, we call it regular intelligence and emotional intelligence. And I'm sure you and I can agree, emotional intelligence is what's causing me to see things under a pessimistic lens. It's not our regular intelligence, because our brains process data. Now, there's also such a thing as a fluid concept of business reality. Aristotle was talking about, is there such a thing as reality? And their Greek philosophers couldn't agree. Or are we all seeing something different? I talk about Plato, an allegory of a cave. Are we, chained to the walls of the cave? Puppeteers are moving objects. We're only looking at the shadows. Have I created the cave in my own mind that is only enabling me to see the shadows versus reality? So those are the things. So some of the variables that you asked me for are the ones that we investigated further, but there's so many more.
And one of the most important things, and I know you are a big advocate of this, Maya, is that before we can try to relate to other people's perceptions, we need to first understand ourselves. And one of the challenges I find, and I want to get your thoughts and perspectives on, is that in many instances, people that become managers, leaders, and more experienced in organizations and move up in the hierarchies of organizations, their the input that they get from the world around them becomes a lot more skewed. Therefore, their self perception doesn't develop with their tenure and with their experience. If anything, their self perception becomes more skewed as a result of them moving up in the hierarchy of the organization. So, what do you advise to people and leaders in organizations to do in order to first uncover and understand their own perceptions better?
Yeah, we have to be, and we will touch upon the epic process. So what you're talking about is the first step of the epic process, which is evaluate. So when Diane and I we were talking about this, you have to be self-aware. You have to be conscious of how okay, I know what I'm trying to project. So I'm engaging in this conversation with you. I know what I'm trying to project to your listeners. You know your target audience, and you're also know what you're trying to project. I'm just going to speculate some things, some common themes we can agree on. You want me to feel comfortable. You want this conversation to be engaging. You want to make sure and I'm sure you're having hundreds of guests. You cannot say that you're equally interested in every single topic. So sometimes you're going to catch yourself faking interest, but doing it not in a manner where you're projecting that you're faking interest. No, you're going to force yourself to project really having an interest. You're currently, and the listeners may not be able to see, or you're nodding your head, you're supporting my points. So what you're trying to project right now, speculating, is support, warm and welcoming environment, engaging conversation, and making sure I'm comfortable. What I'm trying to project is being knowledgeable on the subject. I don't want to embarrass myself in front of the audience. I don't want, I don't, you're not coming up with any gotcha questions, but I'm also not prepared for gotcha answers. And I'm also trying to be warm and welcoming to your audience members. And I'm also trying to be clear and concise, which is a big area of opportunity for me. Okay. So we have to evaluate our own self. Now, back to your question. The higher people go up the ladder, the less likely are they to get any meaningful feedback. And you don't need another research study solidifying that. People are doing 360 feedback, people are doing this and that, but they're using the company servers. They're using the survey link that is tying them. Enter your email, it's going to be anonymous. Ultimately, I'm now in the interim dean position with the Forbes School of Business and Technology. When I was a regular faculty, I probably heard more about myself than I'm ever going to hear now. And that is, now something happened to me this morning. I had this presentation in Beijing webinar, and I had one of my employees there, and my employee was there to translate, to help me if there's a need to translate or anything like that. And I was trying to put labels, what I think I'm projecting as a leader. And I was asking the audience, put 3 labels. And I was saying passionate, empathetic, something along those lines. And I said, well, let me ask Woody, he's my employee. What are the 3 words coming to his mind? Now, chances are Woody's not going to say anything negative, right? But his first label was trustworthy. I would have never put that as my first label. It would have been number 6 or 7, but that's what he sees when he thinks about me. He said trustworthy. Second label was workaholic. Now that, I didn't realize I was projecting that. So how insightful for me. I mean, they're both okay labels. There's nothing wrong with them, but not what I'm projecting first.
Yeah, so and that is really important. So the one thing I encourage all of us to do, and I have to consistently do myself, is your first step that you mentioned in that epic process. It's evaluate, and in evaluating, we need to become more self-aware. And if we think we are really self-aware, then we are the ones that need much greater self-awareness, because the leaders that I found that feel like they really get it, they really are self-aware, are the ones with the biggest blind spots, that they are shocked when they truly find how other people perceive them. So digging in to become more self-aware is really important.
Well, the thing is, leaders that usually claim that they have an open door policy and they're really open-minded and this and that, those are the ones that want my experience, everything is our experience, right? They want flattery the most, and they are the ones that have some narcissistic tendencies. I am still proactively trying to get feedback. I am aware of some of my areas of opportunities, but ultimately evaluate is something that you start within your own self. And yet again, you have to assess the audience, and that's where predicting step. So it's epic. So the second step is predicting. I am predicting that hopefully you're receiving my message the way it's intended. So in a global setting, it's incredibly important, if I'm saying something, ensuring first and foremost I'm not offending you. Secondly, you're able to, well, not offending you is first. Second is making sure you understand me. Because if you're already offended, you already understood me, right? So those are the type of things, like, and also I'm counting on being able to predict your reaction. I was in a corporate setting and I was managing different training labs. I came into one, and I just sometimes would sit in the room, not necessarily to micromanage, just to observe. And I'm noticing half of the audience is almost ready to fall asleep. Superbly discreetly, utilizing the first bathroom break, I approached my trainer, whispered, "It appears they need a lengthier break." She looked at the training manual and she said, "Well, I still have to cover all these 10 pages. I said, "You're not covering anything. You lost your audience." And she was so focused. She's a good trainer, but she was so focused on her task that she had zero understanding of her audience. She did not predict what others are receiving. And she looked at me, she's like, "Are you serious?" I said, "You lost them." I said, "Right now you can cover the whole manual. They're not listening to you." And those are the type of things in a business negotiation, predicting the reaction of another company and another partner. And also, I don't like when people think they can ride on the strength of their charm, not having facts. Be over prepared and then utilize your charm. Charm is important. But I had so many business meetings where a person comes clearly not prepared, and we're just gonna fall in love with the idea because they're charming. That doesn't happen in a business world. It happens sometimes, not as often.
Yeah, so for that prediction, you also emphasize the need for curiosity and empathy, which are key parts of that emotional intelligence. How does empathy play a role in a greater ability for prediction and understanding perceptions?
Prior to this interview, you took the time, and I actually was very appreciative of the time to get to know me. I shared my story. You shared a little bit of your story, not because my story, you were completely frozen.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. So, if can you please like rewind a tiny bit? You
Okay.
said prior to this, we had a chance to have a
Yeah.
conversation
Yes.
where you,
Yeah. Uh,
thank you.
Prior to this, you were kind enough to take some time with me for us to get to know each other, which I think is terrific because you don't want to get to know each other through the interviews. Sometimes that's not the best approach. You shared a little bit of your story. I shared a little bit of my story. Based on my heightened sense of empathy, I actually have a very heightened sense of empathy. I made a prediction that my story will resonate with you. I do feel that my story is compelling enough. I'm predicting, yet again, am I certain? No. I'm predicting my story is compelling enough to resonate with many audience members, but I'm very certain it's resonating with you because of the similarities of our stories, overlap of our journey. And we do belong in that unfortunate group of people in the world that no one wants to be a member of that group. Having gone through a turmoil in our own country, having to leave a country under an unfortunate set of circumstances, I always say that those are the labels that no one wants. No one applied for a membership, but once you're a member of that club, you relate to each other.
Yeah.
We are a community. I talked in Ukraine recently. I talked in so many different places in the Middle East and Africa, and sadly, once you're a member, you're always a member. So the story resonates. That is that empathy that I utilize, predicting your reaction to my story.
Yeah, what a beautiful example, and you predicted that very well, Maya, in that you have the empathy based on the experience you have gone through to then therefore connect to the experience I have gone through and see that commonality will enable us to connect with each other. So you have a good prediction on my possible perception. It's never 100%. You can't read someone else's mind. Different people take things differently based on their experiences. However, based on that initial conversation, you had a much better chance at predicting my perception than you would have if you had not had the curiosity to ask the questions, to know the background, then to be able to show that empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is that getting to know the person. So when I've done research across the world, and a part of my research, observational study is the first step of any research venture I do. I live in a particular place, get to know the people, and those people may not be related at all to the research study per se, but getting to know the culture and observing and really getting to know them. And I do, I'm overly critical of certain traits of my personality, but I also would like to give it credit where it's due. And one thing I'm not lacking is empathy. I'm definitely lacking some optimism, but empathy is not one of those things that I need to work on.
It's a great strength to have. And also what I have seen is that like most other aspects, empathy can also be seen like a muscle in that when we work on it, we can develop greater and greater empathy. It's not a finite level. It's not people that have extreme empathy and people that have none. Maybe because of life circumstances, some of us have more, some less, but we can continually work it, develop it. It makes us both better human beings and much better at predicting the perception of others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with leadership, gender differences wise, we have to be careful because women that are showcasing too much of their empathy sadly are sometimes accused of being too emotional versus gentlemen that are presenting themselves as a bit more not lacking empathy per se, but they're perceived as stronger or more assertive. So I'm always mindful of those type of perception because I was on the receiving end of being told that there are certain cases where I really was incredibly passionate about a project, but my passion was interpreted as emotion. Whereas if it was the gentleman saying the same things, he would have probably been coded properly as passionate. So we can ignore differences and saying everything is the same. When we do that, we're doing each other disservice, and we have to be aware of it. So I am empathetic, and I'm showcasing it when and where needed, but I'm also sometimes forced to suppress it in different settings.
Yeah, and that's an important point that you make, Maya, in that as much as we want, the perceptions of others are biased based on societal influences, and there are still different ways people view. You can see it whether it's in politics or business leadership, in all kinds of arenas where one person, a man, can get away with a certain statement when the woman couldn't. So we can't just wish it away.
Mhm.
While we can work toward a time when we don't have to worry about all those things, the reality is those things matter.
Yeah.
Which is why then your third step is interpret that prediction. What is that, and how can we more effectively interpret our prediction?
Well, a lot of our intelligence mechanisms are at play during interpretation stage. I like to create a visual of us computing all the data in our brains. I know why I came here to your show. I know what I'm trying to project. I am predicting with some level of confidence, not a full confidence, some level of confidence, your reaction. I am predicting the audience reaction. I'm computing all the data and I'm making decisions. Which direction am I going to go with as we move forward with the interview? Which topics should I cover moving forward? So I'm not really making any decisions during interpretation phase. So if you're negotiating, you're at the negotiation table. During that phase, you're literally looking at your quote unquote opponent, studying their facial expression, trying to figure out if your message was well received. You're predicting what their reaction is going to be, and you're gathering data, kind of getting ready for your next move. So you're in the phase of the data gathering. You're computing everything. That is your interpretation. You may not act at all during that stage. You may not actually take any action. You're prepping for an action during the correlation phase. And correlation is when you're putting it all together. And let's say in a scenario of a business negotiation, at that point of time, you're going with a proposal. Or at that point of time, you're walking away from that meeting. In a personal relationship, you are deciding to go on a date with this person, or I will never see you again. So those are the type of things that, and a lot of times the decisions are not that drastic. I mean, you may just decide to change the location or something like that. But ultimately, that is when you're actually taking action. So the epic is evaluate, predict, interpret, correlate. Now, we are not aware of this process. There's no way you and I are interacting. And you're like, okay, now we're predicting, now we're interpreting. That'd be silly, right? We go through this process without realizing we're trying to move perception from subconscious process to more awareness, at least in a business setting. Um, there is a place for gut feelings, there is a place for charm, but you cannot run on the strength of your own charm and gut feelings in a business setting in a long run, especially globally. Why are you polishing your perception? To increase your chances of success, and also not to torture yourself. This person hates me and they're not, that kind of a thing.
Which a lot of times happens to be the case also. Now, so one level of it, Maya, is our understanding of ourselves, our self awareness, therefore strengthening our perception from that perspective. Another level of it is that ability to have greater empathy and connect with others the whether it's the prediction and then the interpretation and correlation in relation to that. Now, when leaders are reflecting on this and they're looking at interacting with a team or a group of people, what are dynamics and factors to keep in mind when you're dealing with a group beyond and besides just your own self perception?
Some of the companies that we were working on, they were administrating a perception index, trying to determine how their employees perceive reality. Short of perception index, you are starting to get to know all of your employees. There's a lot of these things where people say, this is just business, this is nothing personal. You have to get to know your employees. If you're approaching everyone with one size fits all approach, if all of your communication, business communication, is dry and just sticking to the facts, you are going to miss a big chunk, a big segment of your audience. Therefore, you constantly have to be aware. First of all, do a basic drawing. What are you trying to convey? Is this a positive or negative message? Just last week, I was communicating something, and I was on a mission. There were like 5, 6, 7 items to communicate on. And honestly, one was not necessarily superbly positive. All the others were pretty much straightforward. There's nothing to debate, or in my head. And one of the employees said, "Oh, is there anything positive?" And I said, "Wow." And, I've done research on this. And I was like, wow, I'm project. What am I projecting? I'm projecting intensity, my body language. What I was trying to do is I was trying to get through all the agenda items. It's okay to have 2 meetings. If you're going to come across too strong, too assertive, too intense, the receiver hears something that, just the pure facts, nothing to debate, all of a sudden is perceived as negative. So that is that's what leaders have to do. They have to be constantly keep themselves in check, being aware, observe, not trying to squeeze in 17 items in one meeting like I've tried. And also be mindful of, you can't always communicate differently with every single employee, but there are certain employees that will need that one-on-one depending upon the size of your team. And there are others that will never need that. Circle back with the ones that are requiring that, because just putting them at ease, reassuring them. I have employees that need to be told they're doing a great job on a daily basis. I have employees where if I check in with them every 2 weeks and say, just keep going, they're perfectly happy. It's my job to know who is who. And because if I'm doing with the second employee, if you're doing a good job every day, I'm going to start annoying that person. They're not going to receive that well. They're going to be like, why is she doing this? So that's important. I mean, getting to know your employees. And you mentioned something. I've seen many leaders, high-level leaders, that are absolutely not aware as to how they come across. They have zero awareness. And I say to myself, how did you get to the point you're at, having zero awareness? You only had like the group of cheerleaders trailing behind you, and no one ever told you that there's some opportunities for you.
Yeah, it is a huge issue, Maya. In my experience, I see the ones that don't have that challenge do two things differently. One is they sincerely encourage and reward dissenting opinions and people whose views counter their views and their perception. Now, again, I say this mindful of the fact that I'm sure vast majority of people listening are nodding and saying that's exactly what I do with my team. In my experience, most leaders don't really do that with their teams. It's their body language, their reactions shows, because we do become uncomfortable when the points we hear are counter to our perceptions, to our opinions of ourselves. So one, leaders encourage that. Two, having a trusted advisor also helps, because there are a lot of times when we don't have the ability to question and view our own impact on others. So someone that can push us at times can really help.
It's so funny that you mentioned trusted advisor. I wasn't even thinking of mentioning it. I do have a few employees that I can call and say, how was this message received? Did it go well? what are your questions? I do have that. I'm blessed in having that. But you never want to hear negative things, even though they're not intended as negative. Like I said, that last week I was like, wow, how did I miss the boat on that one? Because I really was not even conveying anything negative. There was one item that was kind of concerning. All the other items were just kind of matter of fact. But I've had leaders in my life that were very self-aware, and then I had leaders that had zero sense of self-awareness. One thing I did notice is that is incredibly hard to change. As much as we work on the perception, think about perception. We're always working on the back end of perception. The formative years are so incredibly powerful. That is why if a person had a trauma in their formative years, in their childhood home, something horrific happened, that is why people have consequences throughout their life, regardless of how well they're doing right now in their lives. So in my case, formative years were my strength, but it can be other way around. Some of the values that I brought from my home, I've been living in the United States for 26 years. Prior to that, I lived in 2 different European countries. So one would think that those values coming from my childhood home are completely gone. They are not. The concept of fairness is sometimes killing me in a corporate setting, because my grandfather told me, everything should be fair. and literally, he set me up for success in so many areas. There was only one area that I feel he should have warned me a little bit more, is this concept of fairness. And if I perceive something in a corporate setting as not fair, which often happens, it's very hard for me to embrace that. And that is one thing that I can't get rid of. And I'm not even trying, because I think I'm right. So.
And again, that is part of that journey of self-discovery that we as individuals and leaders need to go through. Understanding those perceptions, where they come from, and how they impact us. We can choose to keep them as they are, or we can choose to change them. Now, the other thing I've been fascinated with thinking about your work, Maya, is that our perceptions impact how we react to the world around us, and how we react to the world around us then impacts our perceptions, which are to a certain extent reinforced. So it's like a closed loop going back and forth. And I wonder, how can we change this loop so it serves us best, so we don't get stuck
Oh,
in our perceptions dictating how we behave, then the behavior reinforcing our perceptions so we behave the same way in the future?
well, what you're asking me is how to exit that cave that our mind created, because
Yes.
you're defining the concept of a cave, right? So we're now seeing shadows. We're not. Well, I would say observe, reflect. It's okay to be quiet in many settings, and I promise you, I know how to be quiet occasionally. Not today, clearly, and try to define your areas of opportunities. I've defined mine. I will not win this world when it comes to the concept of fairness. My perception of fairness will never align with a business reality. Period. I said it. There you go. I said it. Okay. I have to be aware of that. I have to embrace that. I have to work within the parameters of that. Secondly, is I am understanding that I have more of a pessimistic outlook. I have to force myself to put my research hat on, gather all the facts and analyze, without letting my emotions overshadow my thinking, and without letting my emotions warning me of a danger. Because the pessimism is connected with our self-preservation mechanisms, or mental shortcut, increasing your decision making to a success level, and ultimately shielding oneself while harming oneself. Okay, so I have to be cognizant of that. Am I successful? 50-50. I go into a meeting and exit that meeting, and the world is about to end, and then I'm like, Maya, stop it, snap out of it. So it is a process. It is a process. It's not one and done. Educate yourself, that both of us have done, and many of your audience members listening to this interview, listening to all this information that we have available. Do not look for the facts of your own preference. Intentionally get out of your comfort zone and seek opinion of others. Social media is not helping us. That's why we should not be getting our news on social media, because the algorithms are messing up with us. and we're constantly looking at the direction of our own preference, and that is creating the cave type of a setting. And also be mindful. Some of the simple tips that I started implementing. If asked a question in a corporate setting 10 years ago, I was compelled to give you the answer right away. I was perceiving you thinking that I don't know what I'm doing if I don't give you the answer right away. I'm incredibly comfortable saying, I don't have the answer right now. May I get back to you? And you may say, well, that's not revolutionary. It is for me. It is for me. So your audience member, each one of them will define what revolutionary is for them. It may be something incredibly simple. It may be something incredibly complex. Some of the tips that I'm doing are very simple, and they come from the level of awareness, increased awareness of what I'm trying to project, how I'm perceiving, and what's hindering my progress as a global leader.
What outstanding perspectives, Maya, with respect to the self awareness it takes and the fact that it is a process and a journey and an ongoing one at that, both with the self awareness and then working on the areas that matter most to us. First of all, I appreciate the fact that you didn't choose this conversation to be quiet. There are white noise podcasts that people download, and I don't understand why, but they do, and they just have white noise in the background. None of our listeners want white noise. They're looking to get leadership
Yeah.
insights and thoughts, but also the fact that you chose to share something that you are prioritizing and you have been working on, which takes a lot of confidence. It sounds simple, which is don't always immediately have an answer. Sounds, I nod, makes sense. However, there is a lot of discomfort associated with that when we are seen as being in a position of authority and then being willing to say, I need to take time, I need to find out, I need to reflect, or whatever else it is, and not just jump in with an answer.
Now, I would like to end by asking you, how about you? What are your opportunities?
Oh, with respect to perception,
Yes.
my biggest opportunities, Maya, is that I interact in many instances with clients. So I am the one that is pushing them. So they don't get to see me in my interactions. So I don't have anyone that views me from a broader perspective in all of my interactions that can put things together. They're paying me to push them and their teams. So much of the conversations are always focused in on them rather than back on me. That said, what I need to reflect on more is reflect a little bit more on the questioning part of it versus always the answer part of it. So, related to what you mentioned, in that part of what my clients rely on is my background and expertise in business. That said, I don't always have to have the answer. And sometimes I feel like I have to have the
Yeah.
answer. So that is something that I uh, know I need to work on myself also. But the third thing I'll mention is that I have had conversations with a couple of external guides, friends, coaches that support me. However, I need to systematize that more, so maybe they get a chance to view some of my interactions with clients. I think that will give them a deeper understanding of the areas I need to develop in.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and it's hard when it's kind of a one-sided because of the nature of your business. So you don't always get the input from them. You're still learning because any interaction is taking you on a journey of learning, but it would be more meaningful if it's kind of a back and forth. So I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate that. Now, one other element I would love to get your thoughts on, Maya, with respect to perception, is that some organizations have been in a virtual environment for the past couple of years. Many have transitioned into a level of what is called hybrid, 3 days in person, 4 days in person, but still there are meetings and there are times when people are virtual. How does virtual and hybrid interaction impact our perceptions, whether it is how people perceive us and or how we perceive and interact with our teams?
Well, the landscape, the work landscape changed significantly. And in our particular case, our university was always online, but there were offices. There were lots of offices in California. We closed the California office. We have a presence in Arizona. We have an office, but the vast majority of the employees are not in the office. So we do have the leadership meetings 4 times a year. Some leaders have more frequent meetings. And ultimately, we are a remote workforce. And I can tell you that those meetings are incredibly meaningful. That the team bonded and connected so much more through the meetings that we had on site. So I do feel that even companies that decided to go remote, they do have to have some sort of leadership retreat, employee meeting type of element in order for the force to be engaged and to get to know each other on a more personal level. I think a lot of folks are getting very burned out from Zoom. So if the companies are really going to be remote, we don't have to meet on every item.
Yeah.
Because we were never when we were in the office, we didn't have 17 meetings a day. It is okay to send an email to someone and say, "Hey, John, what do you think about this?" You and John do not have to have a 30-minute Zoom. So we are going through a cultural shift and we're finding our footing. So if the hybrid is the model that works for some companies, that's gonna be fine. I think hybrid model may work best, but many companies are gonna go full-fledged remote. If so, they will have to restructure stuff. We will have to define again what's okay to be an email, what's okay to be a phone call, and not every single thing has to be a meeting. I woke up this morning at 8 a.m. and because of some webinars and stuff I had, I never left this office. Someone asked me, well, you asked me, see, I forgot. You asked me how the weather is. I said, I assume it's sunny. I wasn't trying to be funny. I really assume it's sunny. I mean, it's Florida, it should be sunny. I haven't heard the rain, but that's about it. So that's also not healthy. So I think as every company is going to have to find the happy medium. Every company, and I don't think that any industry generally, we had a thought leader summit last year. We were talking about post-pandemic work landscape. I think all the industries are completely restructuring, and money saving is first and foremost as far as the remote workforce, but you have to talk about mental health. You have to talk about engagement. I got many more things done once I met fellow leaders face to face. All of a sudden, I was not hesitant to reach out to them. So I don't know. Verdict is still out on that one.
Yeah, we still have a long way to go to make whether it's virtual or even hybrid work effectively. There is real value to those in-person connections. And if anything, to your point, is that the fact that the technology is there doesn't excuse the inefficient use of the technology. So things that should be an email are being turned into Zoom meetings just because it's pretty easy to schedule a Zoom meeting and end one, start the next one, end one, start the next one. So if organizations are in a hybrid or virtual environment, they really need to reflect on that work process and not rely on the technology the way we have relied on it over the past couple of years. At the beginning, people used it to work with each other and to connect as humans with each other, which was wonderful. But what has happened is just most of the clients I interact with, Maya, people are overscheduled with meetings, and many of them there's
Oh,
very little reason for the meeting and no one knows why they're meeting, but hey, it's easy, we're scheduled a Zoom call. So Maya,
well,
in addition to your book, The Power of Perception, what other leadership resources or practices do you typically find yourself recommending to leaders as they are managing through these unpredictable times?
well, my friend Larry Robertson, his book on rebel leadership, and several of his other leadership books, I found those fascinating. Because in today's time and age, we are these leaders that have to be maverick, they have to be authentic, they have to be ahead of their time, they have to be rebels. So that is the one that I definitely recommend. I my co-author's book on curiosity, Dr. Diane's book on unlocking the code to curiosity, is incredibly important, because your perception is so much connected to your curiosity, and those two things are correlated. So that would be those two books I would actually mention
Uh,
for
that's that's outstanding. Curiosity plays a big role, whether it is with our joy in our own lives, personal lives, but also with respect to leadership and connecting with others. And Larry, I had him on the podcast. Love his book and writing. Have loved my interactions with him even more, Maya, because one of the things I love about Larry is the fact that he is core to his being the kind of leader that he advocates for and he talks about, and kind of leadership that he talks about. So I couldn't agree with you more on your recommendations, and most especially Larry's Rebel Leadership. So you have a fantastic TED Talk of your own, a book, you have a perception index. So where can the audience find out more about you, your book, TED Talk, perception index?
Yeah, I will share links with you so you can post it for your audience members. The book is on Amazon. The Perception Power Index is on the best way to access it on drdianehamilton.com website, but I'll give you the link. And then the TED Talk, I'm going to send you the link as well. I was actually very pleased that it is a TEDx that I've done in April. It is published on both TED.com and TEDx platforms, and it is a good supplemental material to all the research that we've done. I wanted to just say one more thing. The book is written for general audience members. Yes, we are both researchers. Yes, we're both academics. We were incredibly mindful that this book will be read by the emerging business leaders, current business leaders, and people that are not leaders at all that want to be leaders one day. Therefore, the book is providing research data, but it is written in a manner that is actually pleasing to general audience.
I I appreciate and enjoy the book, and also with the TEDx, we refer to, and you refer to, the Plato's allegory of the cave. You talk about that in your TEDx. So if people want to find out more, because that's a fantastic story, they can watch that and enjoy it. I really enjoy this conversation and appreciate you joining me in the conversation for Partnering Leadership. Thank you so much, Maya.
Thank you so much. And thank you to your audience members. Thank you for the opportunity.